Hello, hello. This is chapter 5. It's a fun chapter. It's not heavy on theory. It has a ton of behavior, and some of the behavior peripherally relates to what I used to do back in the day before I became a paying guy. I was an auditory guy, and some of that is in here, and some names that are relevant to things. Um, so the author knows that the last chapter was spectacularly heavy on theory, and this chapter is supposed to focus on behavior and some interesting phenomena relating to behavior, but of course, he relates them back to theory. Um, the author has done a bunch of relevant research to this chapter, uh, and that shows he knows stuff. Guthrie here, um, for me, Guthrie is a bit like Kamen. I have a strange attachment to Guthrie. I don't know if I'll try to give you my lecture on Guthrie, but in my mind, Guthrie was doing Rescorla Wagner long before Rescorla Wagner, 30s and 40s. And that's a cute quote from Guthrie, which is not related to the research I wanted to talk about. Modern conditioning theories left the rat lost in thought. That's one of the reasons that Watson and Skinner uh, were not amused by learning theories back then. Modern learning theories are, I don't think, are of this type. Uh, they are testable. They promote a lot of research, and even in this chapter, um, which is supposed to be based on behavior, we'll see that theory is quite relevant. Um, and we dealt with stages of memory in the last chapter: short term, long term. Um, how well is learning remembered? Um, and of course, we can't know if you remember something unless we can get you to recall it and demonstrate changes in behavior based on uh, your prior experience. And don't forget, learning is a relatively long term change in behavior potentiality based upon experience. So, this first study is pretty impressive in terms of memory being substantial, but you really have to watch these figures in this chapter. If all you care about is red and blue and y-axis and x-axis and don't read them, you're going to get confused. You have to look very attentively, particularly at the y-axis. So here the y-axis is measuring licks. And if you lick a lot, you're not afraid. Now, of course, we could imagine doing condition suppression with this design, but we're not. We're doing number of licks. So, we're at about 125 licks when there is no shock stimulus, milliamps, 0, 0.5, 1, 2.0, and you're doing a lot of licking. And yeah, of course, they could have turned this into a suppression ratio, but they didn't. And then we have 3 intensities. And this must be, it's not that old, 1985. 0.5, 1, and 2 milliamps. 2 milliamps is, by modern standards, quite a shock. I used to use 2 milliamps a lot. And I guess 1985 is a little bit after I got out of the shock field. Modern research tends to not go this high. But you can see that 2 milliamps really nails the behavior. It nails it on day one when the training occurs. And look at 60 days later. It looks just like day one. And as the book points out, 60 days may not seem like a long time, particularly if you're slogging through this course. But as the book points out, these rats, when they started, were probably 90 days old. And 60 more days to 90 is a pretty big percentage of their life. And that fear conditioning stuck in there. And an important point here that theories and therapists, and this chapter is very relevant to clinical psychology and therapy, as the author points out in several places. Fear inhibition can be forgotten faster than fear excitation. And of course, this is a real problem for a therapist who's trying to get someone over a phobia. And there's Henderson doing conditioning again, fear inhibition to a light. The light means no shock. And so you have a stimulus present and stimulus with light, where stimulus with light means no shock. And we're again dealing with days, not 60, but 35. All right, now let's stay calm. It's red and blue. There's y-axis and x-axis. But the y-axis, it's suppression ratio. No, it's not. It's suppression index. And the book doesn't go into how to calculate this, but it does say there that fear is, when you're using a suppression index, higher is more fear. And it's disturbing that it's at 0.5, which for conditioned suppression would be no fear. But here 0.5 is higher than 0.33, which is the BX on day one. And so you get a fair amount of fear to B, but BX, where you're conditioned to not fear the stimulus in the presence of X, is suppressed. But look at 35 days later. The B is unchanged. It's arguably just a shade higher. But look at the BX. It's as if the original training didn't happen. And this can drive therapists crazy and doesn't make clients very happy too. Inhibition thus seems to be more sensitive to the effects of time than is excitation. They are not the same. They are different processes, and the inhibition is more vulnerable. Oh, I forgot to look this up. Notice I've highlighted Spear. We've already mentioned Binghamton with one researcher. There were two Spears up there. One did research on crack babies, but they were rats. And her husband was a learning theorist, and I'm guessing it's that Spear. Binghamton was really, really strong on learning theory. So here we have avoidance training, or avoidance training. So they move from the white compartment to the black compartment, which they are prone to do anyway. So this is a pretty natural behavior. Rats like to be in uh, dark environments. Um, so if it takes you longer to move from light to dark, you're not very afraid. And on the next page, we have a figure relevant to that. So what do we have on this? We have median, not important. If you've had stat, you know what that means. It's not important. Functionally, it's quite similar to the mean, but not the mean. So with no reminder, they were slow. And at 72 hours with a reminder, they were slow. But if they got a reminder 24 hours or 10 minutes before the test, bam, they were out of there. So giving a reminder to an animal seems to be able to enhance the fear conditioning, and makes sense that it's called memory reactivation. So this is important. Forgetting can be reduced by a reminder. 96 hours after avoidance learning, high latency is forgetting. That is, they didn't run out of there. And geez, I have to pause, I think. I'm really sorry about that. But when Johns Hopkins calls, I have to answer. So I answered. And okay, so reactivation, I mentioned SPEAR. Why do we forget? But of course, yeah, there's forgetting of the original training, and there's also what the heck is going on with inhibition or extinction, which seem to be quite distinct. And there are several theories, as there often are, but these are just terms. They are not like Rescorla-Wagner. Trace decay, it is what it says. It's like you write something and time passes and it just fades away. And then we have theories about why this might happen. And one thing is that other things in your life are interfering with the original memory, and it's being buffeted by other experiences, and the experiences weaken it. And you should know the difference between proactive and retroactive inhibition, or interference. Inhibition is a related topic. This is relevant to taking classes too. Um, there was a school out west, pretty out west, Colorado College, where they decided that you would take only one class at a time. And sort of a little bit like intercession. And if you were taking my field biology course, I owned you. And if Colorado College is also for rich people. And so the, the instructor would say, okay, next week, Tuesday through Thursday, we're going to go into the mountains and we're going to watch kestrels fly around. And that's it, man, because I own you. When you take a foreign language, you live it. So one of the theories that promoted that was there'd be less interference because you could focus all your energies on the one course. So proactive interference means that what you had learned before is interfering with your memory. Retroactive interference means that what's happened after your training is going back and messing with your memory. There are data supporting both. And, we talked about learning lists and all true, all true. um, it may be true. It is true that over time there's interference, and there's a really, really famous name right here, Loftus, Elizabeth Loftus. She is a social psychologist, uh, did world-changing research on eyewitness testimony, and heaven help you if you're in the legal system and at the mercy of eyewitness testimony. It is demonstrably dysfunctional. And Loftus did a lot of that work. And she looked at some cases of recovered memory and said they were probably not true. And the person who allegedly recovered the memory sued her, and her school didn't support her, and she went through years of hell. So I respect the heck out of her. She, finally came out of it okay and won awards, and uh, really important researcher. Retrieval failure. Um, this is probably related to the phenomenon we've all experienced of tip of the tongue. And during a normal exam where you don't have your book to look in, there's a question on the exam, and you use the profanity of your choice, and you say, "Oh man, I know that, but I can't quite get it out of my head." And unfortunately, sometimes you hit the hall or hand in the exam, and bam, it pops right up. So retrieval is very important. You don't just put stuff in largely long-term memory. You have to get the stuff back out as well. And context comes up in this chapter a ton. Okay, so mean latencies. So if you're slow, you're not remembering much. So with the context switch, where we give you competing context, that interferes with your performance. If we don't switch you to no context, you pretty much have it. And if we switch you but give you a hint as to what's going on, that's about as good as not switching at all. And in either rats or humans, performance during memory tests can be worse when the test is conducted in a context that is different from the one in which learning originally occurred. And there's Boughton, 1993. So Boughton really, really cares about this. And there's examples here. I really like the bottom one with scuba divers. There's a change in context in air or in water, and it makes a difference. And this could be related to also the phenomenon of people not remembering things that happened to them when they were drinking, but drinking can help them come back. The memories come back, and some research here on context, and there's Boughton, and Spear for the review. So, and here's memory forgetting and extinction. And extinction is not forgetting. And there's a lot of this chapter deals with extinction. And, theories of extinction do not explain one of the world's most famous extinction effects, and that's spontaneous recovery. I mean, we've known that forever because Pavlov discovered it, but the learning theories we've dealt with so far haven't really dealt with it. Spontaneous recovery is just one of several effects indicating that extinction does not destroy original learning. Important context effects, and there's Boughton renewal effects. So know what renewal is all about. And what do we got here? We have suppression ratio. We're back to suppression ratio. So if you get up toward 0.5, you don't have much of a suppression ratio. Your fear has been extinguished. And there are extinction trials, and you can see across extinction trials, fear is being extinguished. And then we take you into a test where you were extinguished in A and you retain your extinction. But then we test you, we extinguish you in B, and your extinction is quite reduced. You are quite fearful, high suppression ratio during the first test trial. And then no extinction, quite fearful during the original extinction trial or retrieval trial. Return to context A cause strong recovery or renewal of suppression. And when you see renewal of suppression, that's also renewal of fear. And extinction thus depends, at least in part, on being in the extinction context. There's a lot of context in this chapter. And then we're going back a bit to Rescorla-Wagner and how they deal with extinction versus this new appreciation for context. And there's Boughton again for reviews. Like an ambiguous word, there's an example there about where context can change the meaning of a word. It's down below: fire in a movie theater versus fire in a firing range. And curl up with this figure. You have the CS, which here is a tone. And if you've got an arrow head coming out of the tone, that means it's stimulating the unconditioned or unconditional stimulus. If the line coming out of the tone has a minus symbol on the end, that means it's inhibiting the response to the stimulus. So if you've been trained to not respond to the US, having been trained to respond to the US, the tone has two connections to the US, an excitatory one and an inhibitory one. And if the inhibitory is as strong as the excitatory, it looks like your learning is gone, but your learning is not gone. You have two learnings. You have the learning of inhibition and the learning of acquisition. And then you have the context, the CX, and notice that CX, and notice that arrow, which is an excitatory arrow, is going to neither the tone nor the US. It's going from the inhibitory to the inhibitory line between the tone and the US. And the context hits the inhibitory line and can excite it, and therefore increase inhibition. And of course, if that increase isn't there, you're going to lose some inhibition. So the second node activates the final inhibitory association, but only if both the CS and the context are present. Very important, very different than what we've been talking about up to now, but we have to talk about this. Inhibition and extinction are really important to clinicians in therapy and also to learning theory. So this is good stuff. Yes, but when the CS is presented outside the extinction context, the inhibitory link will not be activated and you get renewal. So read this 2 or 3 times. I know I had to do that. It helps. And now we're talking about drugs, and drugs can be context too when fear is conducted in the presence of anxiety reducing drugs, and then there's a list. Uh, the renewal effect can occur when you expose the animal to the CS without the drug being present. Um, and there's temporal context, which is another form of context. So there's spontaneous recovery, temporal context, and we're looking at percentage initial performance. So more is more. So there's more spontaneous recovery with the control. But when you get the extinction cue, you get less responding. So that's uh, more fear. Um, and then there's renewal, and reminders reduce the failure to retrieve extinction caused by either the passage of time or context. So renewal can be a very important thing uh, to fear conditioning. And again, in this figure, lower is more fear. And this isn't theoretical, it's empirical, it's important. Renewal effect and spontaneous recovery may both provide reasons for relapse. Again, this is way relevant to therapy. Um, Effects of extinction may tend to diminish if the context is changed after therapy or time is allowed to elapse. Um, sticking someone in a prison or in a rehab facility and getting things under control there, but then just throwing them back into the real world, time is going to pass, and also the context is going to be changed. And we should not be surprised by the relapse. And for the love of God, try to convince the client that it's not that they're weak and weird and they're not worth the effort society is putting into them. This is normal learning behavior. Um, and there's again renewal of fear and spiders, and this is therapy. Um, Mixture of heroin and cocaine, dude. Um, the That's quite a thing to press a lever for. And all these results suggest the renewal effect is clinically relevant and may be obtained under a wide range of circumstances. You have to be familiar with this. Um, and then a related but different phenomenon is reinstatement. Uh, the new U.S. Presentations condition the context, and conditioning triggers fear. And there's Boughton again, Spear here. Uh, and once again, over and over, extinction does not destroy the original learning. So this, by the way, has great societal relevance. When should society worry about bad behavior in their citizens? Some, let's say conservatives, would like to not, coddle people. If they do bad things, then we will try to fix them. Whereas people who are maybe more progressive will try to deal with things before bad behaviors occur. The data are really compelling that if you allow maladaptive behaviors to occur, the society is going to have a heck of a lot more trouble dealing with those people than if the behaviors never occurred. Um, and there's a little reference again to retroactive interference because extinction occurs after. And then there's the issue of counter conditioning, which is again relevant to therapy. Systematic desensitization, Volpe, 1958, that goes back a bit. And so he tried to, his therapy involved uh, conditioning clients to associate stimuli, for example, that elicited fear in the past with relaxation. Um, so it's not extinction, although extinction is in there, but you're learning a new response. It takes a long time to do this. Um, so there's a table that hopefully you can understand now, showing, I wish they had bolded the headings: extinction, counter conditioning, aversive, appetitive, aversive, verbal interference, latent inhibition, and Hall-Pierce negative transfer. Um, so that's worth looking at. And oh, look who wrote it, Boughton, 1993. And Boughton, lots of Boughton in this chapter. He really knows this stuff. He cares, and therefore he cares for you. And there's context again. When latent inhibition was reversed by a context switch, it could be restored by a retrieval cue. So one thing can make things weaker, but a retrieval cue can bring things back. Thus, latent inhibition looked like it was forgotten with the context switch, but latent inhibition was forgotten over time, and you could reactivate things. It's all important, boy, to therapy. All important to therapy. And there's something you can put in the bank. We know that latent inhibition is not the same as conditioned inhibition, and there's a discussion there. And here, the CS starts coming up here. What are you expecting? Are you looking for water or food? CS is going to be important to this stuff as well. And now we do a little neuroscience, which is, one of my fields. I never really got into this kind of research. McGaugh, huge name in the field. And protein synthesis has long been thought to be important for memory consolidation, memory formation. And you can take drugs that block protein synthesis. And if you need protein synthesis to consolidate or learn something, it's not going to happen. Oh, and there's Ledoux, which we saw earlier. And seeing Ledoux should remind you of the amygdaloids and that creepy song about fear that I gave you a link to a while ago. And the protein inhibitor synthesis inhibitors are classic for inhibiting memory consolidation, but there are other drugs as well. And what's still amazing to me is that I can understand a memory is vulnerable as it's being consolidated the first time. So you're training an animal to fear something, for example, and I give you a protein synthesis inhibitor, and it blocks learning. Not so surprising. But what still amazes me is that having been trained to fear something and demonstrate the fear like a normal fear, the reactivation of that fear amazingly seems to make the fear vulnerable again. It's as if it's thrown up in the air again, and it has to land again on your cells. And that landing often seems to involve protein synthesis. And so even if you have a client who has a well-established fear, giving a drug that prevents that landing, which doesn't have to be a protein synthesis inhibitor, it could be something that reduces fear or anxiety. That can help reduce that fear, and um, that consolidation after the first consolidation is referred to as reconsolidation, which is a good word. And there's a protein synthesis inhibitor, and we have maybe for the first time now freezing, which is a classic measure of fear in rats, very popular. And more freezing equals more fear. So we put a stainless steel tube, probably in the brain. In the brain, doesn't say where, which is okay. And we inject either the vehicle for the protein synthesis inhibitor, uh, or we inject the vehicle plus the protein synthesis inhibitor. And you can see that when you get the inhibitor, you get a lot less fear. Now, you're not going to stick cannulae, plural for cannula, in the brains of normal humans. But if you can get a drug in there that affects, and you probably wouldn't mess with protein synthesis either, because that does a lot of things. The beauty of the cannula is you're delivering the drug to only one small location in the body. Um, but this is potentially very important. And one of your colleagues who went to grad school at Emory worked in a lab with someone who was trying to thought they had a marketable business idea for combining uh, drugs with extinction to deal with fear. I don't think it worked out because I never heard about the drug, but he was at neuroscience with a whole film crew, and I mean a whole film crew. He walked into the room and like five people came in with him with cameras and booms and stuff. I don't think it worked out, but there's great potential here for treating fears. And you know, protein synthesis inhibitor removed the memory, prevented the memory from being reconsolidated. It might really be erased. Uh, Not like what we saw earlier in the chapter where you have an excitatory connection and an inhibitory correction, a connection. Here, the excitatory connection goes away. And there's Ledoux again. Uh, and he's written a very readable book for popular press on fear. And yes, propranolol blocks beta adrenergic receptors. You know, this is in neuroscience. And we see McGaw again. And this is related to what the researcher at Emory was doing. And this might be very important. Now, startle is what I did my dissertation on. Um, and this, not this kind of startle, this is fear potentiated startle. I've got some figures on that. So if you startle more, you have more fear. So you acquire it, or you can then you look at extinction, and they're about the same. But with propranolol, uh, it looks like there's more extinction, retention of extinction, and less massive amounts of fear. And there's our placebo conditions with or without reactivation. So if you get the propranolol, you don't get much reactivation. This is potentially magical and very important, potentially for clinical practice. It combines learning and neuroscience and clinical to have a multi-dimensional uh, attack on the fear. Notice that the group given reactivation plus propranolol showed very little startle. Uh, it's as if it had wiped out the fear. Uh, it's and then we refer back to Aesop and how emotions are important, and blocking reconsolidation should have no evidence of showed no evidence of reinstatement at all. This is amazing. This is truly amazing. One of the reasons you should also take the neuroscience course if you're going into clinical psychology and you don't know neuroscience. Good luck with that. Um, I'm going to get to my stuff here in just a second. Um, so there's reactivation and consolidation and or reconsolidation. Um, you're right. You can increase fear if you block extinction. And there's Ledoux, and this I can't overestimate how important this is. Now let's take a quick look at my old stuff. Um, down here, we have a graphic representing fear potentiated startle. So here we have a light, and the rat is on a shock grid. You can tell because it's bars, it's not solid. And the light, light shock, light shock, light shock, you can have different intensities. That's going to generate some fear. In the second frame, there's no light, and you have an acoustic stimulus which is loud enough to make the animal jump. And this is what I did my dissertation on: noise, sound-induced acoustic startle. But in the final panel, you have my acoustic startle, which I tried to figure out the pathways for. And then you add a stimulus that's been associated with fear, and you get fear potentiated acoustic startle. So again, acoustic startle is startle to sound. That's not fear, that's just the way you're made. But if you're in the presence of a fear stimulus, you jump more. And you probably have all had this experience. Sometimes in movies, they'll put you in a state of fear, and then there'll be a sudden noise, and you almost come right out of the seat in the movie theater. That's fear potentiated acoustic startle. So be able to differentiate between acoustic startle and fear potentiated acoustic startle. This isn't new here. This is just reinforcing what's in the book. McCulloch is later. I'll do that later. Let's take a look at this. Mike Davis. If he hasn't come up yet, he will. Okay, my dissertation. How important that? Oh, good. View, present. Okay. So what did I do? That looks a little horrible, but it also should remind you of Pavlov. So trust me, the animal is gently restrained. They have been accommodated to that little cloth string sling, and they just hang there, which allows me to put them on a table that's underneath this ring stand that can measure movement and measure movement very well. I made the table by dumpster diving and finding an old record player, and making a coil of wire and taking a magnet. So whenever the animal would move, the turntable springs would bounce, and that would move the magnet, and the magnet moving through a coil of wire would make electricity. And I could measure acoustic startle, which is what I was interested in. There's no fear here. The animal is just chill. And notice also that you can see the animal's ears there. And I studied, that's the sound I used to make to them when they were in their cages. Their ears would twitch, and if the sound was louder, they would jump. So I was trying to study the neural pathways for the ear twitch, which is called the Pinner reflex, and acoustic startle. Again, no fear here. And this is what I did. So this is the auditory system pathway I was interested in. Notice that a lot of those lines cross the midline. Another term for crossing is decussating. So there are decussating fibers at or near the midline. If you can go into the midline with a very small knife, you can do virtually no damage to the animal's brain except cut the decussating fibers. And down below are two pictures. One is a cut I did on the midline and cut the decussating fibers, but as a control procedure, I also did double lesions out here, a left one and a right one. And here you can see the white areas in here. Those are the axons that died. So I was cutting the decussating fibers of the trapezoid body. A mother's eye can see that there are big fibers down below and smaller fibers up above, which actually is relevant. Um, Now, if you increase sound intensity with moderate intensity, the animal's ear wiggles. And that's how I got interested in this. And at about that intensity, I, I can look at the ear muscles. Their ear muscles would twitch at about that level. Now, in us, some of us can wiggle our ears. You can raise your hands if you can wiggle your ears. I can wiggle my ears. I discovered that in church because I didn't like the choir. And I used to make a rumbling sound in my head to drown out the choir. And as I was rumbling, the woman behind me said to her child, "Look at that boy up there wiggle his ears." And I said, "Oh my, I can wiggle my ears." And now I can do each independently. So they have separate pathways. And then there's acoustic startle, which my dissertation was on, and with very high levels of sound, well, about acoustic startle level or higher, animals will hit levers to turn it off. It's an aversive stimulus. So if you care, and this will not be tested on, the large fibers that decussate, that's acoustic startle and escape. If you cut those fibers, they won't jump to loud sounds, and they will not hit a lever to turn it off. The Pinner reflex survives all the cuts, so whatever that is, that doesn't seem to decussate. And I don't know about middle ear muscles, but I'm guessing they're pinna and they do not cross. So I'm sure you found that fascinating. Uh, I'm really glad I still have those pictures. They're in beautiful color, by the way, but they come out pretty well in black and white. Um, and that's my dissertation. Again, I'm not testing on that, but I do know stuff about this chapter. And we'll run into someone relevant to me in a minute. Then there's, context, which is very important to clinical. Context modulates responding. And don't forget that figure earlier on with the node in the middle of the inhibitory pathway. And there's Holland. I think I mentioned him before. One of our graduates worked with him over the summer and then eventually worked with someone in this chapter at UCLA. And now we're talking about occasion setting and feature positive and feature negative. And you really just have to look at the figure and master these concepts. They're straightforward. Not for that. I'm sorry. That table is important to feature positive and feature negative. And there's responding to feature positive and feature negative. Those are theoretical. Those are not real data. Um, and there we go. Back to Pavlov. Feature negative discrimination is just another name for Pavlov's conditioned inhibition. You got to give Pavlov credit, man. And now we're hitting Rescorla Wagner again. They come up in their alternate theories, and there's the table. So there's a review question at the end of this chapter that asks you to talk about feature positive and feature negative learning the Rescorla Wagner way and the occasion setting way. And notice that Rescorla Wagner has arrows that go directly to the US. And the feature positive is just an excitatory arrow in the feature negative. The tone has an excitatory arrow, but the light has an inhibitory arrow. And in an occasion setting, the light either hits the excitatory arrow from tone to US for feature positive, or the light has an inhibitory connection with the feature negative. So, if this is your first time through this may be a little dazzling, but if you read the book, um, it should be a lot more clear. And there's some Rescorla Wagner and some theory. And I love this at the end. Unfortunately, learning doesn't always work this way. So true. I remember going into a position and having been told by another physician that something was true, and I came in the second one and he said it wasn't true, and I said, well, what's going on here? And he just put up his hands and said, this is medicine. That's not very encouraging. So there's positive and negative. And this is so clever. Is this Holland again? Holland, clever guy. I think he's now maybe at Hopkins, um, doing basically neuroscience research. Really good stuff. And so clever. I mean, of course, in 77, that was sort of on the cusp. But in early days, to watch animals, you had to, take film with silver on it and make movies. But certainly by 77, we could make videos, and he made such clever observations about how the animals reacted to a tone CS versus a light CS, and the rearing versus head jerking behavior. So clever. So you can't read an animal's mind, but if the animal's mind leads to rearing versus head jerking, yeah, you can. And this is still uh, complex, and it depends on things. But in 81, which is about the time I came to Scranton, found evidence of occasion setting. That is, the rat jerked its head rather than reared. But when you read this box and you look at the difference between serial and simultaneous stimuli, a huge difference in what the animal is doing. So with serial, huge head jerking, where with simultaneous you get rearing, but it gets complicated because the intensity of the stimulus can affect what simultaneous conditioning will do. Good stuff. Holland is really, really impressive. I'm very glad that one of a Scrantonian went through his lab. She impressed the heck out of him, which is one of the reasons she went to UCLA. And there's more Holland there. And there's positive and negative occasion setting, and an occasion setter's power is quite separate from its direct association. Right, right. You've got billions of neurons in your brain. Rats have less, but it's complicated. And learning one thing is not necessarily the same as the as learning another, and the two may combine to affect your behavior. And again, you've got to be aware of this when you're doing therapy. Uh, this is weird. If we test an occasion setter's effect on a new conditional stimulus, it typically does not affect the new conditional stimulus. Dude, what does it mean? Um, and there's a nice review here, and it's complicated, and we have to do more research. Uh, and again, dealing with therapy, and this is a drug addiction and paraphernalia, and CS being context. If the cues are occasion centers, that treatment that you're trying may be ineffective because we've seen occasion centers are not affected by simple extinction. Uh, we really have to understand extinction much, much better. And occasion setters might signal whether a US will occur. The target might signal when it may occur. Uh, as the book says, that's not bad, but there's more complications than simply that. Uh, this is where you have weak uh, stimuli having different effects. And again, it's that guy Holland. Occasion setting will occur when a weak feature signals reinforcement or non-reinforcement of a stronger target. And there's a little model with occasion setting, and again, you got tones, which is CS and US, and there's the light and the positive occasion setting and negative occasion setting. And the light is either exciting or inhibiting. The inhibitory connection between the CS, the light, and the US. If you're not comfortable with these figures, get comfortable. They simplify things tremendously, and you have a whole paragraph of words and references, but that figure really tells the tale. Look at all the references to Boughton. Jeez, this guy's a machine. The main point is that occasion centers seem to operate by modulating the target CS's inhibition. Right. Sorry, I have a dry mouth. Let me try some water. If you think that didn't help, if you think back to the last chapter, the terms elemental and configure approach should make sense. And the bottom line on this paragraph is that most research has taken elemental rather than configural. Configural has to be kept in mind because, in part, it's more cognitive, and cognitive seems to be winning the field over straight learning theory or Skinnerian straight operant theory. And here we go. So Mike Davis, He's he was the researcher who ran the lab that your colleague got her doctoral dissertation from at in Emory, and he studied fear potentiated startle. So when I was in grad school, Davis was trying to figure out the pathway for acoustic startle, just like I was. We came to different conclusions. I then went into pain and fear, but left acoustic startle behind. Davis decided to look at the interaction between acoustic startle and fear and did really, really important research. Fear potentiated acoustic startle is important for research on fear in people, and acoustic startle can be used to actually as an indicator of the effectiveness of drugs on schizophrenia. Really important stuff. And Mike Davis was the only person who ever cited my dissertation. Uh, I never published it because I moved across country. I didn't pack my boxes well, and my raw data just was thrown across the entire continental United States. I haven't gotten over it. Um, and I've already showed you the figure. So again, you condition fear to a stimulus, often a light. Acoustic startle happens just because of loud noises, no matter what. But when you have that acoustic startle occur in the presence of a fear-inducing stimulus, you get more startle. So you can measure more fear by more startle. And ASOP goes nicely with that. And again, Davis, I mentioned, he was trying to come up with a clinically relevant treatment for depression involving drugs that reduced anxiety and condition response. It's often neglected. Um, and there's the jerking and rearing again, very important. And this Timberlake research. Uh, so in there's a secret door in the animal's chamber, and when the button is pushed or the programming is triggered, the door opens and a whole rat comes in the back of the box and just sits there. And that's your stimulus. And boy, does that affect the behavior of the organism uh, in the conditioning situation. Pretty amazing, very clever, nice going Timberlake. And now we're getting into classical conditioning and drugs. And here's Siegel again with morphine and compensatory responses. And Siegel is a mover and shaker. And there's Fanslow. So Fanslow is the researcher at UCLA that the student who worked with Hollins did her dissertation with, and she won the National Award for Best Doctoral Dissertation of the Year in that field. And Fanslow is a force of nature, and he worked with Bowles, and evolutionary thinking is very big with him, and I think you can see that in his research. Now, the McCulloch effect. Um, I teach this in sensation and perception, but there's Siegel again. Boy, that guy is clever. And there's a nice discussion of it. If you want to experience this, you have to invest 8 to 10 minutes in it. Oh my God, where is it? Oh, there it is. So we certainly cannot sit through this now, but there's a YouTube video and the guy will talk to you. So to make this work, get your head in there, look in the middle of the screen, and just let it wash over you. Um, it works for me. I'm kind of tired today. Here's a result from the web. Sorry, Google's always trying to help me. Um, if you're tired, it will impact on you better. So, I used to think of this as something to do with with receptors, but obviously Siegel, uh, and he's right. Of course, he's always right. I'm always wrong. Thinks it involves neural processing and compensatory effects, not unlike those that he discovered with morphine. Um, and I'm a little surprised that this is coming out so late in the chapter. Thus, conditional responses that develop during conditioning might be the ones that are best in helping the organism get ready for the unconditional stimulus. Yeah, might. I mean, I'm a fan of evolution, and learning evolved, and it's a pretty good guess that these things are adaptive. Um, and then we do a little more morphine, which is fun. And I've seen this. So this is uh, you have uh, mean activity counts, 5 minute periods, morphine and saline. So morphine is red, and you can see that morphine initially inhibits behavior, but then there's a rebound effect where you get an increase in behavior, and then the author is referring this back to SOP and A1s and A2s, and that's really good. And this figure is, I didn't get it the first one or two times, but it's brilliant. So, in a real response, the unconditional stimulus and unconditional response are both mediated in the nervous system. But if the drug you're taking triggers a peripheral effect, and insulin is discussed a lot in this chapter, and because insulin changes things, and the nervous system says, "Oh my God, what's going on with glucose?" And then the nervous system learns to adapt to that, and that's the unconditional response. That's very different. So in the top, the stimulus is directly affecting the nervous system, and the nervous system, does the UR. In the second, the drug is not affecting the nervous system; it's affecting the peripheral nervous system. But then the change caused by the drug in the periphery of the body, the nervous system notices and responds to that. And there's, the insulin example. Insulin decreases blood glucose. The central nervous system is very vigilant about glucose levels, and when they see that drop, uh, they notice and they increase the blood glucose. So that's a nice figure. And there's discussions of other examples that are relevant to that. And at the end of this, furthermore, drugs may have multiple effects on the body, some of which may be nervous system and others may not. Right. It's complicated. It's complicated. Get used to it. And behavioral systems. Timberlake shows up again, and the next figure is terrorizing. Not him. No, he's very friendly. We like him. That figure is terrorizing. Now I'm dealing with machine learning, artificial intelligence, and I'm trying to have computer programs look at people's faces, actually the measurements of human faces that we make, and predict whether they are schizophrenics or not, or bipolars or not, or homosexuals or not. And the artificial intelligence generates neural networks that look just like this. And there's nothing to learn here other than the gestalt. Uh, that there are modes, and in each mode there are different behaviors or different modules, and the modules can trigger different behaviors. The bottom line is it's complicated, and this is reality. To my mind, it probably is pretty representative of how the central nervous system works. Clever Timberlake, and then Fangelo comes up again, and I remember when he was promoting this, and we were kind of fighting back then, and at first I didn't like it, but of course anything I don't like I'm wrong on. And predatory eminence and evolution in bowls, the clever stuff, very clever. And there's Damian, and one of your colleagues went and got his PhD with Damian. Oh, I mentioned this before. Give me a little digression here. I want to show you. I used to use his book all the time, and this is the book that made me stop using his book. Um, I'm protective of psychology. I care what people think of us. And the thought of my students walking around campus with a learning and behavior book, and this is a tough class. This is an intellectual class. This is not a gimme class where they would have to walk around with that cover and people would laugh at their textbook. No, that's not happening in my class. So the second that book came out, I stopped using Damian. Uh, this must be his new book. Let's see if that's less offensive. It's less offensive, but I'm not going back. I now like this book. But there he is, and he does the Japanese quail stuff, and the story is very much like the stories we've already seen with Timberlake and Fangelo, and general search, focal search, consumatory behavior. Lots of parallels across very distinct researchers. I'm glad that Boughton references Damian, uh, shows respect. And time near CS, more is more. And you can see that there's a big difference between uh, 1 minute and 20-minute CS US intervals um, for focal search versus general search. I hope my voice gets it. Gets me to the end of the chapter. I'm almost there. So close. um, and dealing with therapy. And here's Boughton dealing with his. I'm sure he's done lots of research that dealt with clinicians and panic disorder, agoraphobia. If you've ever known anybody with either of these problems, oh my, can they be debilitating? And they really deserve a lot of attention. And agoraphobia is more common than you would think. Fear of the marketplace. And now he's about to use the same perspective here uh, on preparatory and consummatory behavior, distal cues, proximal cues, anxiety for distal, and the full-fledged panic attack. Boy, you don't want to go there. And if you've ever had a panic attack, get some therapy, man, because if you let that condition recur, it can strengthen. Do not ignore it. Fangelo again, and we're dealing with fear again. And Kim was was a graduate student of Fantalo, just like your peer was. Kim went to Yale, where he was a faculty member with Wagner for a while, and then he moved on. I think he went back to where Bowles was. And one of your peers did his honors research relating to Kim. Fear seems to move through the brain across time. And we were looking at whether extinction would differentially affect fear depending on when you did it, depending on what part of the brain it was in. It's a little related to the consolidation and reconsolidation theories. And this course is so relevant to clinical. And the end, the conditioning occurs because of both physiological and behavioral responses. Of course, behavior is physiology too. And there's good ending, Holland. These summary questions are excellent. It seems like so long ago that we did conditioning extinction, but of course, I also got the call from Hopkins that interrupted the lecture. So I hope you're seeing that this is a relevant course. It's not just a bunch of stuff to memorize that will never be relevant. Even if you're not a clinician, this stuff is relevant to things like fears and stuff. So I hope you've enjoyed the chapter. I hope it saves well, and I'll see you next time.